Well, if you're like me, and it seems like there are many people like me in this regard, you're watching the World Cup. Anybody here watching any of the World Cup at all? I think everybody in the world is watching the World Cup, even Americans who are not about football, right, soccer, watch the World Cup. And for those who love the sport, all eyes are on Rio de Janeiro as teams like Brazil and Germany and Colombia vie and duke it out for the World Championship. I mean, there is a fever in the fact that the U.S. team has made it as far as it is, has kind of captured many a people's imagination here. But what I want to say to you is that the biggest story that I've seen go on in Rio has absolutely nothing to do with a big-name team winning. In fact, the big story for me was one that happened in the very first round with a team that is long gone, lost right away, and has disappeared. And people probably don't know much about it. I'm referring to Japan, who in the very first round lost to the country known as the Ivory Coast. Right? Okay, big name game. And what was interesting is not the outcome of that game, but the aftermath of that game. Because it is a truth and reality that when most soccer nations win a game, or even when they lose a game, but when they win a game, their reaction is, and I have never figured this out, why winning equates to rioting. I've never really, but you know, there are countries like, I don't know what happened in Brazil yesterday when they won. I imagine it was craziness. And you know, there are nations like England where they like to flip cars over and light tires on fire, especially when they lose. But when the Japanese lost the game, you know what they did? I bet you didn't hear one word about it. When the Japanese team lost, their fans cleaned the stadium. Their fans cleaned the entire stadium. It is an act of respect, you see. There are no other soccer fans in the world that do that when their team loses. But for the Japanese, it is a matter of respect for the host, for the team that has beat them, and for the property that they have been privileged to be a part of. That's why in Japan, in the public schools, they don't employ custodians. Did you know that? They don't employ janitors or custodians in the public schools because it is an honor to go to school, and so on the weekends, listen to this back there, on the weekends, the students go and clean the school. Unheard of in almost every other part of the world. Imagine asking American kids to do that. There are, in fact, in Japan, these events known as hanamis. They're big festivals, like we have blues festivals and all these festivals that go on. And no matter how many people participate or come to it, when they leave, the park is pristine. You'd never know anything took place there. When I read that and explored that, I thought to myself, what a contrast that is to the way things go in our country. I mean, have you ever gone to a movie here and walked out of the theater afterwards? Your shoes stick to the floor, and there are popcorn containers and pop containers everywhere. Or even after a parade. Even after a parade, the mess people leave is absolutely incredible. It's just a wonderment. It's bizarre to me how people discard their junk, assuming that the wind will take care of it or that someone else will clean up after them. It's disconcerting. It's disconcerting because I think that kind of attitude, it's not just about the trash we literally see, but I think there is an attitude in regards to just kind of discarding things and throwing them away that bleeds into all other aspects of our lives as well. You know, the notion that, well, somebody else will clean it up, somebody else will take care of it, it's somebody else's job, and it's easy to discard, not just to litter, but to litter our moods, to litter our opinions, to litter those things and cast them around and just figure out somebody else is going to take care of it. You know, my least favorite word in the American vocabulary is whatever. right? Whatever. Because that simply means that it's just, I'm blowing it off. It's somebody else's garbage. Let them take care of it because I don't really care. Which brings me back to Matthew 10. And what the evangelist Matthew recalls as Jesus' directions for what it means to be a disciple, what it means to participate in discipleship. And what he says here is that discipleship is a behavior that is learned or adopted. It is not something we inherit. It is not something inherent in our DNA. You see, I think it's probably human nature to just throw things away, to just discard things. I mean, when I was in Israel, digging, going in an archaeological dig, the Romans were the trashiest people in existence. You can literally see their remains as you dig down. They just throw it. I suspect that comes easily to people, to just kind of walk away and leave things. Just like it's human nature to respond to other people in anger when they do us wrong, or it's human nature to worry or to scheme. There are ways that we act that are more natural to us probably than not. But Jesus here would have us to see things differently. Jesus would call his disciples or those who follow him to behave in a different manner. Jesus says that our human nature needs to be improved by a divine nurture, and that only by the nurturing of the Spirit does our nature learn to do what the world says is weird and opposite and won't work, and that's turn the other cheek, walk the second mile, give up your coat, and clean up after yourself. And deep down, I think probably most of us recognize, because those of us who've been parents, what's one of the first things you taught your children? Don't bite. Obviously, there's a soccer player in Uruguay that had bad parents. Don't bite. Share, right? I mean, we taught our kids that, and yet somewhere along the line, as they grow up in our society, our culture, we teach them something completely different in their maturation. And we teach them to not let anybody push them around, to watch their back, to look out for themselves, because there's always going to be somebody else to get you. So in this week's gospel, Matthew provides us with a whole different set of rules. And these new rules prescribe the behavior of discipleship. And these new rules are not rules at all, because the only rule they give us is the rule of Jesus. And that is, the simple thing, how would Jesus behave? How would Jesus respond? What does Jesus call me to do? Which is a far more difficult rule than just outlining A, B, C, and D. I mean, that's what separates Christianity from many other religious traditions, is, especially those based upon legalism, is if I keep these laws, then I'm a righteous person. I mean, if I obey every stoplight, if I never speed, does that make me a good citizen? Completely? Or is there something more within that whole process that makes us more valuable in terms of our communal relationship and in our sharing and makes our society appealing to people to live in? You see, keeping the law is not about eating the right things or going to church a prescribed number of times during the week. It's not about stealing literally somebody's property, their money or their home. It also means not to steal their pride or their dignity. Going to church or keeping the Sabbath is not just about coming here on Sunday. It's about living out the Sabbath laws or the Sabbath behavior throughout the week. You see, Jesus says it's nice to be those who are nice, but Jesus says be nice to the unnice. Wow, that's tough. As the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, let all that you do be done in love. Sounds so easy, doesn't it? And yet it's the hardest rule of all. Because it means welcoming not only the stranger, but welcoming the person who's strange. Right? The person who's strange, the person who is different. It means being kind to those who are little, not just those who are big shots. You know, prophets were not welcomed in Jesus' day, nor are they today, and children are still overlooked victims because they are powerless in almost any age. And Jesus tells his followers that we have a responsibility to clean up. To clean up not only after ourselves and the messes we create, but to get involved and to clean up the mess even that other people leave and have created. That the first in God's kingdom must be willing to be the least, and the master, the servant of all. These are not laws, rules, callings that we like much. They're not the rules by which the world functions, but maybe they're the ones that we need. A number of years ago, when we lived in Chicago, we used to go to at least several games down at Comiskey Field. I think it's Cellular Field, or in Chicago they call it Sellout Field. That's facetious for selling out to cellular to buy the name of the stadium. It's not because they sell it out. But it's a tradition there, and we used to love to go down. The tradition is at the end of the game, kids pick up all the empty beer and Coke cups in the whole stadium. And of course, they're kind of bribed for it because they return them to a place and they get souvenirs. I call it junk, but they call it souvenirs that they get. But they loved running around the entire stadium picking up, and they'd have stacks and stacks of these glasses. And what's interesting to me is after all the sporting events they've been through their lives as they've grown up, and all the games, the baseball games they've been to, one of the ones that always ranks in their top 5 is that one. And it's not because of the game at all. They can't remember a thing about the game. What they remember is how much fun it was to go around and pick up those dirty cups. You see, there's joy that comes in living right and doing right when you don't really have to, that we don't get anywhere else. There is satisfaction that comes from helping others when we don't expect anything in return. We only become dissatisfied when we help others with an agenda that this is what we'll get in return. There is satisfaction in helping people expecting nothing back. And just think how much better we would all be if this was the way that we decided to act. But we can't expect those outside the faith to act this way until those of us within the faith begin to get it right. Right? I'm going to preach a new sermon when we start practicing the first sermon. But it's not easy. And I know it as well as anyone. I know it's hard to do this. It is very hard. But it was hard for Jesus. But the Gospels also tell us that though it was hard, it was worth everything to Jesus, even worth giving his life. And so this text asks, what is following Jesus worth to us? What are we willing to do? What is the mess you're going to clean up today? Amen. At this time, we will continue our